So good evening to everybody and welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so looking forward to sharing the evening with you, to sharing some insights, to finding out a little bit more about you. And it really is a treat, I think, to put some time aside just for you. As women, we so rarely do this. We are really bad at doing this. So it is fantastic that you've given yourself the gift and a treat of some time this evening. So I'd like to start off by saying that you are more powerful than you even know. I actually put this presentation together because I'm just so tired of people almost being victims to the whole feminist movement that we're so hard done by. And it's not that I don't acknowledge that we are still in a very unequal society. We are. The stats prove it on every turn. But I do think that we need to learn how to show up without making men the enemy. And we need to advance women and ourselves, not to the detriment of men, but rather to find partnership and find a more workable way of using what we call power. And the one thing that I am also noticing is that when women do step into positions of power, sometimes they stop taking care of themselves and they stop taking care of women in general. And the rising tide doesn't necessarily raise all ships. So we also need to keep that in mind. And I just see so many power games taking place. And it's men versus women, women versus men. There's just so much that's going on. And I think we're missing the point. So I just want to acknowledge all of you that you are more powerful than you even know. In fact, women are way more powerful than men, but we've bought into this victim mindset and we allow ourselves to be cast as the victims all the time. This evening really has been designed to help us to try and change our inner narrative, because the words we use and how we see ourselves, it's very, very important. So I'm a woman, just like all of you. I have been employed like some of you. I spent the first 10 years of about 8 years of my early career being employed. I've been an entrepreneur for about 25 years. I have built a brand and a business from home with children at various ages and stages, as all of you are currently doing in COVID-19. So I totally get it. I have been a wife for 26 years. I am a mother of boys, 2 boys who are now nearly 21 and 25. And some of you, I know from the names on the screens, have traveled this journey with me since you had small children as well. And I am also, as many of you know, a widow. I have been a widow for the past 2.5 years. It was not something I was expecting in my 50th year. And so I've worn many jackets, many hats, many of the same jackets and hats that you are wearing. I juggle a lot of balls just like you do. And I really do live my life to empower myself and to empower other people as well. I'm not a believer in complaining and taking no action. If we complain, then we must step up to the plate and we must take action. And I really am a believer that we all have the freedom to choose. No matter how dire our circumstances are, we all have the freedom to choose. We don't like to allow ourselves to do is take sabbaticals. And we tend to fear change. And I want to get into that because change is not a bad thing. It depends what we do with that change. And if I actually look back on my life, I think there have been 3 or 4 times where I've taken a sabbatical, whether it's been a few months or a year. And it's in those kind of gap years that my evolution has speeded up enormously, where I've changed direction in a big way. Because sometimes, because of our busyness, we don't hear the messages. We don't hear the call of our hearts. We don't hear the call of maybe people giving us messages about the gifts we can share that we may be not sharing right now. So I can honestly attest to sometimes just stopping, and sometimes I haven't stopped by choice. I've been stopped in my tracks And when I think about it, I blew a third disc in my lower back. So I had 3 discs that blew. And I lay down for 4 months as if I'd had a spinal fusion. And it was amazing, the metamorphosis that happened to me while lying on my back on the floor for the most part for 4 months. I stopped for long enough to hear the call and to learn the lesson. And that's why I do the work I'm doing today, because I actually had been asked for years to share with people my own thinking, my own opinions, but hadn't stopped for long enough to really hear it and let it land and then make that shift. And I took a year off when I had my second baby. I threatened to miscarry. I'd got to the end of a learning curve and I'd plateaued out and I needed something new. And I threatened to miscarry. It's the only time where I've done, when I say nothing, we never do nothing, but when I haven't had a job. And it was an amazing year. I have to be honest, it came with such incredible gifts. And it is a highlight of that is a year that will always remain a highlight for me. And sabbaticals can look different to different people. Remember that much. And they can be of different lengths. A sabbatical for somebody could be a week. For somebody else, it's got to be 6 months. For somebody else, it's got to be a year. And I think that that's also one of the things that we should be thinking about is letting go of our preconceived ideas of what is right and what is good. We are so stuck in pictures of how we think life should be, and we then lose the option to feel along our way how life actually is for us. And for me, that's a really, really big thing. So there's been a lot of giving our power away. I think that although we are very powerful beings, when we play the victim card, which many, many women do, I'm not saying women on this webinar are doing it, probably not because you've showed up, but many women are playing that victim card, and it's a power game, a power over, even though we might be showing up as being needy, it's actually very often a manipulation. So are we clinging on to, or are we letting go of gender inequality? And I don't know if any of you read my blog, but there's a line in there that says, if it's going to be, it's up to me. If it's going to be, it's up to me. And it's something that is worth holding on to. And I think it's been so reinforced in my journey as a widow. If you go through any loss and if you want to survive and thrive through it, you have to take responsibility for the journey. By all means, somebody can throw you a lifeline, but you have got to be present and active in your own rescue. If you don't help rescue yourself, then you are placing yourself in a victim situation. And that is a very disempowering place for you to be. And what happens then is we start withholding communication, we start manipulating, we become unsupportable, actually. So we need to become a lot more aware and awake to the kinds of games that we're actually playing. And if we don't, then we're going to be forever stuck in this victim mindset. And I'm going to share a picture with you just now, which I think is going to show you what I'm talking about here. But first of all, I'd like to run a poll. So I'm going to ask Carmen to launch this poll. Not this one. That is not the poll. Oh, no, hold on. Let's start with something even better. Seeing as we were talking about letting go, let's start with this. I hope you can all hear this. Carmen and I have tested it. If you can't hear it, please will you let us know in the chat feature, but I think it's going to play beautifully. And it is a recital of a poem called She Let Go.
go. She didn't search the scriptures. She just let go. She let go of all of the memories that held her back. She let go of all of the anxiety that kept her from moving forward. She let go of the planning and all of the calculations about how to do it just right. She didn't promise to let go. She didn't journal about it. She didn't write the projected date in her daytimer. She made no public announcement and put no ad in the paper. She didn't check weather report or read her daily horoscope. She just let go. She didn't analyze whether she should let go. She didn't call her friends to discuss the matter. She didn't do a 5-step spiritual mind treatment. She didn't call the prayer line. She didn't utter one word. She just let go. No one was around when it happened. There was no applause or congratulations. No one thanked her or praised her. No one noticed a thing. Like a leaf falling from a tree, she just let go. There was no effort. There was no struggle. It wasn't good and it wasn't bad. It was what it was, and it is just that. In the space of letting go, she let it all be. A small smile came over her face. A light breeze blew through her, and the sun and the moon shone forevermore.
So I would like to ask, what did that mean to you? It's the most beautiful recital. What did that bring up for you? Any hands? Did it strike a chord? Did you enjoy it? You can give me a thumbs up in the reactions button. Did you enjoy that? It's stirring and it really makes you think about how much we are relying on the judgments and the opinions of other people in our showing up in the world, and just how much we are looking for affirmation and confirmation from outside sources all the time. Our own affirmation of ourselves seems to not be enough. We're always looking for advice. We always want somebody to confirm that our decisions are just right. And I don't know about you, but I journal a lot. I read a lot. And because I like to expose myself to different thinking. I don't think any of this is bad. But I just loved it when he says she didn't check the weather report or read her daily horoscope. She just let go. And every time I hear this, there's this huge sigh of relief, this permission to let go without judging ourselves, and to embrace also, it's the embracing of something new without judgment. We are so judgmental of ourselves. We are so analytical that I think that we are avoiding tapping into our intuition about what's right for us. And I can honestly say that having been through what I went through with my husband, the fact that I'm still alive today is in part such a combination between scenario planning, which is a head thing, and following my feminine intuition, which is something entirely different, and bringing the two into play. And that is that big differentiator between men and women, is that we have this very powerful intuition. But when we're too busy and too much in our heads, we don't feel it. We don't hear our intuition. And I have to be honest, my intuition is 99% right. But are you really listening to that intuition? And then the part where it gets to no one was around when it happened, when she let go. We're waiting for an audience. whether it's our children, our partners, our husbands, our bosses, our colleagues, we keep looking, like your children when they start playing sport and they run along with a netball ball or a soccer ball or a cricket bat or a hockey ball, and they look to see if you're watching. They look for that affirmation and acknowledgement. And we're so conditioned to be looking for it that if we're not getting it, we think we shouldn't be doing what we're doing, even if it feels right. So there was no effort. There was no struggle. I think we have become conditioned to think that nothing is worth doing unless there is a sense of struggle and effort. We've bought into the fact that it should always be tough and difficult, and it doesn't always have to be that. And I'm going to investigate a few things with you this evening that relate to this poem. And in fact, I'd already put this presentation together before I read that poem. And when I heard it, I actually changed the title of this presentation. It was going to be entitled Showing Up with Power and Grace. That's how I was going to entitle this presentation. And the more I sat with this, the more I went, no, that's the power game. That's not what I want to be playing here. I want to be actually exploring how we can be strong like silk, yet soft like silk. Silk is soft and strong, and we need to be being both. If we're strong, we don't have to give up all our femininity. If we're feminine, it doesn't mean we can't be strong, but we do need to find a way to embrace both those aspects of ourselves. And as I said earlier, I think that we are all way more powerful than we even know we are. Right, next up, I would like to not do this again. This wants to keep playing. Sorry, I've got a little stuck slide. Right, I would like to do an audience poll. So I want to ask you this question. Do you want to be rescued or do you want to be supported? Do you want to be rescued or supported? And I don't for a minute think we haven't all had a moment where we just want to throw our hands up and go, oh, I wish somebody would just come and take this pain away. I wish somebody would just come and help me. Do I really have to do this all by myself? I think we do from time to time really want to be rescued. But for the most part, deep in our souls, very interesting. 97% of you would like to be supported. And yet I think so much of our behavior gives the opposite message, that we want to be rescued. And that puts us, it minimizes us. It shrinks us in the eyes of ourselves as well as in the eyes of other people. So be very clear if you want to be rescued or supported. And even in my worst of times, interestingly, with dealing with the death of my husband, for those of you who don't know, he was actually murdered in our home during a home invasion. So it was a very traumatic death and a traumatic loss. So it's amazing how people want to rescue you, often because it makes them feel better. And I had to often claim my space and my aloneness in order to deal with all the emotions and the change happening in my life. When my days were filled with people constantly, and they were often filled with people, there were times when I had to say to people, please leave me alone. And then they'd get hysterical and say, but are you going to be okay on your own? In fact, it got to a point where I was invited to speak in America 4 months after my husband's death. And I accepted the invitation because I just needed to get away, not just from the marinade of the trauma, but I needed to be alone. And I remember even my mum said, but you can't go alone. How are you going to cope if you have a meltdown? And I said, Mum, because she was most worried about the 24 hours in the airplane over to America. And I said, Mum, I don't know how I'm going to be on that plane. I might sleep because I hadn't slept for months. I might sleep for 24 hours. I might go hysterical for 24 hours. I might cry for 24 hours. I might write a whole book in 24 hours. I might be really okay for 24 hours. And I said, you know what, Mum, however I am, it's going to be okay for me. But it really bothered her that I was going to be alone for 24 hours. And yet I think there's a part of our soul that just yearns to be alone. Now, I know what aloneness feels like. It's very different from loneliness. And being alone is something entirely different. If you've had children, you know how desperate you are to have time alone with nobody in your space. But the problem is, every time we're alone, we sit down. Even if we take ourselves out for a cup of coffee, we will whip out our phones or we'll whip out a notepad and we'll start making lists and trying to control the universe, because that's what women do. We love to be needed and we love to be in control of everything. And it doesn't help us if we don't give up control every now and again. I am having problems with my clicker. Let's see. Okay, so the first analogy I'd like to share with you is to ask this question: what is driving this boat? Is the boat being driven by the wake at the back, or is it being driven by the engine? And I am borrowing this analogy from Dr. Wayne Dyer. And he has since passed on, but was a massive force in the self-help movement. And I was listening to an old recording of his the other day, and he asked this question: what's driving the boat? And I got to thinking about all the isms, in our lives, racism and sexism and all this stuff. And I started thinking, how trapped are we in looking back at the wake of the boat, at where we've been, and how much we name, blame, and shame where we've come from, where we were born, the family we had, the bad marriage we've had, the economic situation. And there's so much finger pointing. My life is like this because, or I haven't got what I want because, my life's not working because. And when you actually start listing all of the reasons, they all sit in the wake of the boat. They're in the past. And actually, the only place where we have any power is sitting in the engine. And we, as the driver of the boat, decide the direction of the engine, the force, velocity, all that stuff. The present kinetic power is what sits in the engine. The present, that's the energy that's happening now, not the wake that's been created, but actually what's happening now. So I want us to really focus on the engine, because that is where we have the power to choose. We have the power to show up, to step up, to stand out. It's all what happens in the engine. And we need to start remembering that every time we point a finger out, there are actually 3 fingers pointing back at us. Now, I'm not for a minute saying that the world does not have to adapt to women. Accommodate women. And this was a conversation I had with Azania today on Radio 702. There is a difference. So accommodating is important. The world has to accommodate women, women's needs, women in the workplace, women who become mums. There's so much that the world of work does have to accommodate. Otherwise, it shuts the door on us. But by the same token, we also have to be adaptable. We also have to change. COVID has given us a really perfect example of how we have to be adaptable, flexible, nimble, prepared to cope with change and disruption, because it's going to come at us anyway. We are human beings. Whether we are men or women, we will go through change. Change is a part of being a human being, and change, positive or negative, is actually stressful. Even a positive change, like you might change jobs for all the right reasons, or think about your children changing schools for all the right reasons. Maybe they're going from primary school to high school. That is stressful, even though it's positive. And then, of course, we get external disruption that we have no control over, like COVID-19, that sideswipes us. And now we have to deal with that change. Because just like me, I cannot unwidow myself as much as I might like to. I can't go back. We cannot uncovid ourselves right now either, can we? If you're divorced, you can't undivorce yourself. If you become a mother, you can't unmother yourself, unparent yourself. We have situations and circumstances that we have to work with. Sometimes it's not ideal. But I just wanted to give you that analogy because it's an important one. And then I want you to start considering what kind of cage you are in. Because I do think that we build cages of our own perceptions, our thoughts, our feelings, our view of reality, of what we think a good life looks like, what we think a perfect life looks like. And if you think about all of that, a lot of that is conditioning. Conditioning from radio and TV, marketing, this is what life should look and feel like. It might be that, the way you were brought up, the patterning of your childhood is a huge thing. And I can tell you that, what I've been through with my husband has shown up the patterns and the thinking in my family. My mum had this clear picture of the perfect family. My husband's death broke the picture. And that was really not okay for her, let me tell you. She wanted to fix the picture. And I kept saying to her, Mum, this is not fixable. I have to heal from this and grow from this, but we can never put Simon back in the picture. So it's a new picture that I'm building, a new adventure that I'm on. And when you get broken open by something, if you can avoid becoming a victim of it, but allow yourself to be broken open and planted like a seed, you can start actually re-envisaging life. I'm actually forever grateful for all the losses in my life. And loss does not have to be just the death of a person. It can be the loss of your health, your wealth, your marriage, a person. It can be all sorts of things, your home. Even just losing my home through the death of my husband has opened my mind to other ways of being in the world. My youngest son could not come home. He would never sleep at home again after we were attacked. So we had to sell our home of 23 years. So I lost my husband and I lost my home at the same time. But just shifting my mindset of not being a homeowner and being a tenant opened up so many doors and windows of possibility because I wasn't weighed down by being a homeowner. Not that I owed any money on my house because we owned our house outright, but it was just a very new perspective, a very fresh perspective. In fact, the only thing I currently own is my car. And that's a very modern mindset. In fact, young people have that mindset. They don't own stuff, they rent stuff. And the great thing is you can hand it back in and get the newest version, which is quite freeing, isn't it? So what is this cage that you are in? And I think that those beliefs, that mindset, even if it's a positive mindset, okay, which many of you have got, throughout the day, we frequently bump into the edges of our cage. And when you hit the edges of your cage, imagine that cage is electrified. When you go close to the edges and you hit them, you get a shock and you feel uncomfortable. And so you bounce back and you think that's not the place to be. So we try and remain where we feel comfortable, even if it's not serving us. So I want you to ask yourself throughout this evening, how is this serving me? So actually, our brains are very brilliant and they keep us day and night plotting and planning how to stay within our comfort zone, because if we get too near the edges of the cage, it might be a bit sore. Because there we might feel jealous, we might feel discontent, we might feel fear, we might feel anger, we might feel all those negative emotions, and we would prefer not to feel those. So, we're going through those things of how can I make it so that he will never leave me? How can I make it so that I'm secure in my job? All of those things keep us awake at night, and we're trying to figure out how not to hit the edges of this cage. And why do we stay within the cage? Why do we stay there, even if it's not serving us? Why do we stay there? Well, it's fear, because when we approach the bars of the cage, as I said, we feel discomfort. And if you approach your limits, you might feel a little bit insecure. Right now, COVID-19 has made us feel really insecure and incompetent. because we've never been here before. So the interesting thing is that as long as you stay inside, and this is a very interesting picture, you know, this is one of those collars that you can put on a dog. So you don't have to have a fence or a gate, but there is obviously a field of electricity, and if the dogs go close enough to that field of electricity, they'll get shocked and they won't want to leave the property. So for as long as we stay inside this invisible boundary, this cage we've created for ourselves, then we won't know what's on the other side. And that's why massive changes in life, like a death or a loss, can open up new doors and opportunities to you. And you don't have an option because your whole life got smashed, that you actually have to look differently. And you actually discover that it's not all bad out there. In fact, it might even be better out there. It might even be more exciting out there. So we work our whole life to stay in the comfort zone, instead of maybe working on our freedom. And I think we get imprisoned and caged. So we're willing to stay in the cage because we're afraid of what we don't know on the other side of the cage. And our comfort zone is familiar, and beyond the known, we feel we might just be out of control. And that is scary for us. This thing of loss of control, that's what you're all feeling with COVID-19, a loss of control. And we women, we like to keep it all together. We like to be needed. We like to know what's potting. We like to be able to plan for the future. And right now, we can't. So there is a price to keeping it all together. We really struggle to hold it all together in our hearts and minds because everything is constantly changing, just because we're a human being. And we're constantly trying to create order out of chaos. Have you worked that out yet, that as a woman, we create order out of chaos, whether it's tidying up a bedroom that's messy or creating a meal, a recipe is creating order out of chaos. Doing mission control on a Sunday and getting all the lifts sorted and the meals sorted for the week and making sure your kids have got everything they need, that's mission control. That is creating order out of chaos. We are experts at creating a semblance of control. We think we're in control, but actually, one of the biggest lessons I learned through my husband's death is that we really aren't in control. It's all an illusion. The only thing we really control is our choice in every single moment and our attitude in every single moment. So we are sometimes lost and struggling with all the energetic and emotional changes that are happening in our lives. And sometimes we say, well, what I'm going through is nothing near as bad as what so-and-so is going through. So the very responsibility of having to hold it all together in itself is a form of suffering and struggle. So even if we're holding it together, there is a form of suffering and struggle. And you notice this most when things fall apart on the outside. So when you're struggling to hold your inner world together, when your psyche's in turmoil, maybe it's a good thing to ask yourself, what am I actually trying to hold on to? And actually the only things we're trying to hold on to really are our emotions, our thoughts, and our movements of energy. And none of those things are solid at all. But we do keep trying to hold on to them as hard as we can. And what I'm picking up a lot at the moment is that if you're a mother, because everything else is feeling out of control, we are over controlling our children. We think, well, that must be the one area of my life I should be able to control things, my children. And so I'm seeing a lot of mums coming into my workshops talking to me about the angst that they're experiencing, the backlash, the kickback from their kids at the moment. And that kickback is actually a kickback because we are trying to micromanage the only thing we think we can control, which is our children. And we're not building in space for them either. Plus, we have a guilt gland this big. Mothers have a guilt gland this big. Fathers have a guilt gland that big. And right now, we're feeling so bad for our families and so bad for our children and so bad for our spouses. And especially if we've got children who can't have play dates and matric dances and all those things, and we're feeling so guilty that we can't fix it. And then when we feel guilty like that, then everybody else can climb in and manipulate us and hit the jugular where it hurts the most. So we do open ourselves up to actually being manipulated, which is an interesting place to be. And when we start being manipulated, what starts happening is that we start holding on to those old patterns as hard as we can. We start naming, blaming, and shaming others or the world for the circumstances in which we find ourselves. And we give away our power, becoming victims to circumstance. So we get into this vicious cycle where fear can root us to the spot, and it makes us hold on to what we have and to our old beliefs. You know, I wanted to go back to the way it was. It must have been better. And I want to talk to you about this analogy of a glitter storm, because glitter storms are actually a daily occurrence in our lives. And I want you to think about this, and maybe some of you have got one of those snow globes at home, or you've made a glitter jar with your children at some point, or go and make yourself a glitter jar. And I'm doing a lot of group coaching sessions and talks for women in the financial services industry at the moment. And in one of the group coaching sessions, we were talking about making yourself a glitter jar if you don't have one. And I want you to imagine yourself shaking that glitter jar and then put it down on the table in front of you. And what happens? The glitter slowly settles. So they happen, these glitter storms. Stuff happens that disturbs us. It stresses us and it throws us off our game and makes us anxious. Our anxiety levels are up here at the moment. And when we're in the middle of a glitter storm, that glitter, it's messy, it's unclear, it's cloudy, and we feel out of control. And the key to surviving a glitter storm is to let our glitter settle. So when you take yourself out for a cup of coffee next time, just imagine you sitting there letting your glitter settle. Because the strange thing is, glitter always settles. And this is a lovely analogy that comes from a book called Under Pressure by Lisa Demoore, and it confronts the epidemic of stress and anxiety in girls. And what happens with us women is that when we get upset, we've got these supercharged emotions, and they can hijack our whole neurological system, our amygdala, and put us in a state of paralysis. And when we're in a state of paralysis, we really can't function optimally. And you know how when you first became a parent, somebody said, count to 10 before you do anything, before you say what you shouldn't say or do what you shouldn't do. And I think we forget that as we get older, that we need to build in space and time before we make decisions. Give ourselves time to settle. Build in time. If someone's pushing you for a decision, something I learned to do really well after my husband's death. If somebody asked me out for lunch or dinner or whatever, you know, well-meaning friend, and I wasn't intuitively, I felt, not sure I can handle this right now. I'd say, you know, that's such a lovely idea. Would you mind if I sat with it for a while and I'll get back to you? Or would you mind if I just checked my diary and I'll let you know? You need to have some strategies to build in a little bit of space. I love that idea. I've just got to go and check what's on my list of things to do, and I'll let you know whether I can fit it in. So build in some space for yourself, whether it's with your children, with your partner, with your spouse. I need to give this a little bit of thought, and I'll come back to you. It's okay. It's okay to build in that space and that time. Otherwise, what happens is we're in a cyclone of distress, we're spinning, and we start feeding our own anxiety by overreacting. And then we feel out of control and we get into the cycle of over control. So we overcompensate. So we're trying to take our power back, but it's counterproductive. So first, slow down, take a few minutes to let that glitter settle. Remember that it always does. Be patient with yourself, wonder aloud, go for a walk, sleep on it, or even color in a picture or build a puzzle. I do that too. In other words, take a step back from the window and you will get a different perspective. And sometimes it's really good to catastrophize, to play worst case scenario. What's the worst case scenario if this happens? I've done it with my kids. I do it with myself. And there's a concept called the scales of importance. Out of 10, how important is this to me? Is it worth the anxiety of what I'm experiencing? Is it going to pay me? Am I passionate about it? Am I interested in it? And how much of my time is it taking? Is it worth it? The scales of importance. It might be something that's really important to somebody else, but it might not be important to you. And if that person is important to you, maybe you've got to make it important to you. But if it's not someone who's important in your life and you're getting stirred up by something, maybe it's time to take a step back and disengage. I think we often spend a lot of energy on things that we really shouldn't because it looks good, because it makes us look like the model person. Meanwhile, we're really battling with the price of holding it all together. And sometimes we really do need to stand up for ourselves and actually take some time for ourselves. So I'm really inviting you to peel away layers of the onion, to be brave enough to peel away the layers of the onion of our lives, to investigate the perceptions we hold of ourselves and our reality, and to consciously be different and show up differently in the world. Then we're on our path to growth and healing. But I think what happens to us as women is we do same old, same old, same old, and we actually get bored. You know, the brain loves novelty, and actually change is quite important. And we actually do get a lot out of collaborating. So collaborating with people brings us a lot of joy. Obviously, if it's working, that collaboration, and co-creating amazing with other people. And I see Kerry Lee is saying, I believe in finding peace with what is in my control. And what is out of your control is out of your control. Absolutely. So sometimes fold a piece of paper in half and write down what's in my control, what's out of my control. And you've got to let go of what is not important to you. So Lorato is asking for the scales of importance. And it's really simple, Lorato. It's out of 10. You can give yourself a score for anything out of 10. How important is this to me out of 10? So I sometimes will write down all the things that I'm busy with at the moment. If I find I'm running out of time, all the big things I'm busy with in the left-hand column, then I write down the amount of time, okay, that this is taking, amount of my time. And then out of 10, I say, how interested am I? The next column, how passionate am I? And the next column, how much money is this making me? If it's a business related thing, how much money is this making me? And very quickly you see where you might be spending 40% of your time, but it's making you no money. You're not very passionate about it and you're not very interested. And suddenly it becomes easy to make a decision to cross that off your list and not feel bad, not feel guilty. There might be something on that list that you're not terribly passionate or interested about, but it makes you a lot of money and maybe it doesn't take a lot of time. That's got to stay. Can you see how it helps you make some wise decisions? Because I do find as women, we try and do a lot more than we should be doing. And sometimes our energy is misdirected in the wrong place. And we sometimes feel that we have to help everyone, including our children. And how many women do I know, when I ask them how many children they have, say, I have 2 children and a 3rd child, my husband. It comes up often that we feel that our husband is the 3rd child. And when we have that kind of approach in our relationship, we are also minimizing our spouse. We are holding them prisoner, a prisoner of our thinking. Ladies, when I say we are powerful, we are powerful. We are hugely, hugely powerful. And I want to share a couple of these points with you because we carry very deep cellular memory, incredibly deep cellular memory of the persecution that we have suffered at the hands of men over time. And we are holding on to that deep patterning, even without consciously being aware of it. If you think about the fact that powerful women in centuries ago were branded as witches and were burned at the stake. This is stuff that our cells remember, just as our cells remember if we were victims of apartheid, of racism. Even if you're not that generation now, you carry that cellular memory. It's important that we understand our patterning, how we were raised, how we, what history we carry, but we also need to remember that's part of the wake of the boat. It's part of the wake. And we have to make decisions about the engine now. But that is a powerful one. And what it did was it made women secretive. And we've started withholding communication from men and manipulating men. And I think it's time that we started looking at that stuff and dismantling it. And we have manipulated men for centuries by shaming them and by blaming them. And in doing that, we allow ourselves to not take responsibility because it's not our fault. So we point back to them. It's not our fault, it's your fault. You need to accommodate us. And to a large extent, they do, but it's not all about them. And I think often with the women's movements over time, we've made men wrong. And when we make men wrong, they make women wrong. Can you see how the cycle just goes around and around? And instead of looking for a workable partnership that's not perfect, it's not made of fairy tales, we're actually looking for this perfect thing that we can control. We want to control. We want to control the men. We want to control the children. We want to control ourselves. We'd love to control all the stuff that's going on outside ourselves. But actually, we can't do that. So we have to learn to be a little bit more flexible. And there is a saying that too many children only know their fathers through their mother's eyes. Too many children only know their fathers through their mother's eyes. And I think that is so true in many instances, that we don't let our kids get close enough to their fathers. And we sometimes run interference. Oh, you want to tell your dad that? Not just right now. It's not a good moment for him. I'll tell him later for you. Instead of teaching our children, particularly our girl children, how to have positive, empowered conversations with their father, who is this male. This is a female-male relationship. Where else can they practice having empowered conversations? And men also need to be allowed to have those empowered conversations with our girls. And we've been running a series of teen workshops, Savannah C4 and myself, and it's been very interesting to have those conversations with parents about opening up those channels of communication. Even if your kids want your husband to know or their dad to know what marks they got, they should be hearing from their children, not from you. So we inadvertently, without even thinking, step in and speak for our children. If we want an empowered generation, girls and boys coming up, we have to empower them to find their own voices, to be able to speak up in the world. And that means being able to have conversations with your mates, your friends, without you stepping in and speaking for them, being able to speak to their dads without you stepping in. And then we also see with boys that they are being raised by their mothers, trained by their mothers, and handed over to their wives, and they get no opportunity to grow up in between because we're just doing life for them. It's time we let go and reflected back at our children, at people in our lives who are maybe leeching our energy, that they have to take responsibility for their own lives. It's sometimes not an easy thing to do, but this is not my life, it's yours. And just to tell you that I'm positively doing this at the moment with my own children. We have such a big generation with this failure to launch, and they're still living at home at the age of 30 and 35. And we can actually justify it by saying it's so hard for our children because it's so expensive to for our kids to set themselves up, and they can't afford it and whatever. Well, I have just moved house. I've just shifted my piece of the puzzle in a big way. And it was actually in complete, conversation with my children. We had a lot of conversation over lockdown. They are boy children. They're young men. They are 6'7". They are huge, man mountain. And we had lots of conversations during those 8 weeks of being in tight lockdown together. where we contemplated, should I rent a bigger house because the cluster that we were living in was way too small for lockdown. Every time I presented something like this, everyone had to shut up, put themselves in their rooms and not use the internet. I needed priority. And I live with these huge guys, who are not normally with me. My eldest was traveling around the world for about 9 months before lockdown, and my youngest is at university. So, I've kind of been having dinner on my own if I haven't been having dinner with friends. So I had plenty of space for me and the occasional son visiting for a few days, but not for all of us full time. So we thought about, should we get a bigger place, not for lockdown, but moving forward. And we all decided it was inappropriate because they are at a time of their lives when they should be moving on. And we make it so darn comfortable for them to hang around, just like we make it so darn comfortable for people to keep making a mess. We make it so easy for people, to get what they want. But how often do we stand up and say, but this is what I want, and it's actually okay? So my kids and I are on this very, very interesting journey of letting go of each other right now. It's actually my son's job to let me go, to tell me to go away, but I am opening the door to letting them go. So I have moved out. We agreed that signing the lease for another 6 months of renting the same place. This is what my children said. My youngest, who is still dealing with huge post-traumatic stress from what happened to us, said, Mum, we are done here. So we landed up renting by default. We landed up there by default through trauma, through crisis. And it was a great place for us for 2 years. And then my eldest son said, Mum, if we stay here any longer, this is comfortable. It's great, but it's a bubble. And if we don't make a move, nothing in our lives is going to change. We will just be treading water. So it was very interesting to hear young men reflect that back to me, because that was also very clearly how I was feeling as well, that it was time for change. You get a bit itchy. So now my eldest son has rented an apartment, and his name is on the lease. Big step. He has to pay his rent. My youngest son has a room in that apartment as well that he will stay in when he comes back to Joburg for weekends. So I'm paying some of the rent. And last night we were doing a budget of everything. And he said, oh dear, I think I might need to earn some more money. So sometimes when we give people the rightful responsibility, they pull their finger out and they get cracking. If we make it too easy, they will stay at home for longer, and they will just stay. I mean, why move when mum makes it really comfortable? So just to show you that we all go through change and we all have to shift. So I've spoken about empowered conversations. And I think that we also need to, as I say, stop instinctively fixing everybody's problems. Let people fix their own problems. Tell them it's not your business, it's their business. This is very hard for women to do. I've mentioned this already, that we are continually looking for that external validation. And I think that things that we don't understand about men are things like that they carry this natural warrior archetype. But what happens when they have no natural enemy to fight? I think that this is something that sometimes they turn on their women and their children because they need an enemy to fight. Especially when they feel trapped and when they're not succeeding. We become the punch bag, not necessarily physically, but it could be verbally, or it could be that we just get the cold shoulder. And men often, when they abuse power, abuse of power is a result of when men fail to use their strength appropriately. And we are witnessing extremes of masculinity at the moment, the abdication and abuse of power in our homes and by community leaders and politicians. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in this American election. Because if Joe Biden wins, He's not the most powerful man. Who do you think is going to be running America if Joe Biden wins? He has a very, very powerful and influential wife. And of course, he now has this, this running mate who's a woman. So we have two powerful women who may be running America soon. I'm not so sure it's going to be him. I think he's going to be the mouthpiece because we women are extremely, extremely powerful. And of course, many women are very angry at men who've abused them, deserted them, or let them down. I think many of us feel let down by our men, even in reasonably good relationships. And we unknowingly pass this resentment on to our children and therefore starting the cycle of men versus women, women versus men, men are wrong, women are wrong, because kids just pick this stuff up. They're so intuitive, they don't even have to think about it. It's just there. Okay. Right, where are we here? So I want to share a couple of lessons from the widow. Okay. When I first became a widow, and this was literally within 48 hours, I discovered for the first time that I had imposter syndrome. My niece, aged 15, was the best person to deal with me going through that shock and trauma and horror. And she sat me down after 48 hours and she said, Nix, I hope you realize just how much you are loved by so many people. And that was a powerful statement all on its own. Then she said something else which completely blew me away. I had not considered this. Now, you might all be laughing when I say this because I do have a big digital footprint and I have impacted on a lot of lives and I am in the media, but I never ever bought into that. I never ever let that land for fear that it might be self-centered and selfish. She said to me, I hope if you didn't realize it by now, that you have worked out that you are famous and that you have touched a lot of people's lives who maybe you don't even know. It took a 15-year-old for me to work that out. And it was quite a shock for me. So imposter syndrome is a real thing for us. When I was recognized by Ford last year, this time as one of their Women with Drive, all four of us, the nominees for the year, were at this gala dinner, and every one of us had to give an impromptu speech, and every single one of us had imposter syndrome. Every one of us. And we are all people who influence and impact on the world every single day. It was phenomenal. And you wouldn't know that, okay? And you probably don't see you have imposter syndrome for yourself either, but we really do second guess ourselves. And it's something that we almost need to create circles of women to feed back to each other. It's been very interesting and something I'd like to share. Now, this is just in the speaking fraternity, but I suspect that it has spilled, it's in every area, is that women actually deal with change and disruption better than men. And that's partly biological and physiological. Because we menstruate, because we have hormones that come and go, because of all of that, our brains open and close like a flower every single month. It makes us much more open to change. It makes us able to cope with change. Yes, I know we can be hormonal, we can be emotional, we can be all those things, but if you look at the positive side, we actually cope with change better. And looking at COVID in my own profession, women took the change much more calmly. We took it in our stride. We did what had to be done. We learned the skills. We put them into practice. The men were panicking. And it was very, very interesting to see how we learned quicker, we implemented much quicker, and we trusted ourselves much quicker to get back on this bandwagon, on this virtual bandwagon. So I found that incredibly, incredibly interesting. I don't know what you've been finding in your areas. And we also, start to see ourselves and judge ourselves through the lenses of people we spend the most amount of time with. And that can be a good thing, and it can be a bad thing. So obviously, if you get a lot of good feedback, positive feedback, reliable feedback that you can trust, that's fantastic. But I'll tell you something. When I lost my husband, it gave me the opportunity to see myself differently. For 28 years, I'd started seeing myself through his eyes, which was not all a bad thing at all. But you become limited by how you are seen by people who know you well. That includes your best friends, it includes your parents, it includes your husband, your partner, your boyfriend, whatever, because you start getting similar feedback. And I had to explain to my children that my adventure now is to discover who is Nikki without Simon. Now, 28 years of seeing yourself through somebody's eyes is quite a long time. I was hoping it was going to be 50 years. But it's been very interesting to allow myself to engage with people who are not in my closest circle. It's been quite a journey to push myself to not just socialize with my best friends, my closest friends, and when you're raw and bleeding, you would really rather be with people who are close to you, or to just socialize with my family, and I come from a very, very close family. And I have pushed myself to socialize with people in new circles. Not that I'm not socializing with my family and my best friends, I am. But I've accepted invitations from people who are not part of my nearest and dearest circle, who are able to introduce me to other people in other circles, and who are able to reflect me back at myself, like me looking in a mirror, in a different way to what I'm used to. It would be so easy for me to stay in my family and best friend circle, and I would keep getting the same feedback that I will always be Simon's widow. I will always be poor Nikki. I don't want to keep living my life walking into a room being a victim. I really don't want to be the person who walks in, oh, she's the widow. Oh, her husband was shot and killed and murdered. I've got to create a new narrative, a new story that's bigger than that. And the only way to do that is to be with new people, new places, new experiences, new adventures. And that has also included, of course, now it's 2.5 years down the track, going on dates. And my eldest son had a massive problem with that at one point. And I said, but my darling, how am I going to discover who I am if I don't allow myself to be reflected back at me by new people? And it's really been a fascinating journey of growth to see myself differently. It's been terrifying and completely exhilarating at the same time. And I think that we live with this ambiguity, and we have to get comfortable with living with this ambiguity. So, yeah, part of adapting is being able to see yourself differently, being able to reframe life. And another lesson that I've learned is that because there were two incomes, because we shared, everything, there was always a backup. And because I was aware of my husband's ego, there were two things. One was I always had grand dreams of earning a lot more money, but I seemed to cap myself at his salary level. Interesting. Secondly, because I had a backup salary, I was so negotiable in business. I didn't ask for what I was worth, and I always allowed clients to negotiate with me. Now that I'm a sole breadwinner, that thought doesn't even enter my head. My reality has changed. I upped my prices straight away, and I've upped them 3 or 4 times, maybe more, since my husband's death, because I'm worth it. Not because I need the money, because I am worth it. I have broken the glass ceiling in my own industry by being the first woman to ever receive a Speakers Hall of Fame award. for the body of work I've created and the impact that I've had on my industry. No woman has ever been recognized in this country for the 14 years prior to that award being given to me as a speaker. It is a male-dominated industry that has a history awake far behind the boat, that is just dotted with men. And to break through that has been a massive thing. But I haven't gone to war over it. I've put my head down and I have carved out a niche for myself and a brand for myself. And I have never uttered a word against men and my men speakers. Yes, they've had it easy. Yes, they have. They have been able to travel to 25 countries and speak in 25 countries a year because they have a wife at home who cleans the clothes, runs the home, looks after the children, etc. Yes, I'm up against that. But you know what? You got to do it anyway. And I believe we can have everything as women. But I've always believed my time will come. I chose to give up a public relations career that would have given me a big salary, that was giving me a big salary. I gave that up because it didn't feel right. It didn't feel right. I had a picture in my mind of how I wanted motherhood to feel. And I needed to be flexible. I needed to be my own boss. And that is not an easy thing. Running your own show is not an easy thing. It's actually sometimes easier to just go back to work, make one decision, and everything falls into place. When you work for yourself, you're trying to get the best case scenario all the time, which means you make 1,000 decisions a day, and it's very, very stressful. But I chose what felt right for me, and I gave up the executive income for a big portion for many, many years. I gave up my pension. I gave up a lot. But I did create something that felt right for me. But the whole time that I was building, I've had 3 different careers: public relations and communications, direct selling, and now speaker and author. But each one of them is linked. And I unpack that in my Which Jacket Are You Wearing Now presentation that I'm doing for a lot of corporates at the moment. I don't believe anything is ever lost. And nothing is ever forgotten. Everything we are doing right now and everything we've ever done, every jacket we've ever worn, every hat we've ever worn, it creates the picture of who we are today. And we don't lose anything, but I hope we're learning the lessons and discovering the wisdom along the way that we can carry through with us as we go along. And there isn't a man who can follow what I've done because I've done it in such a unique way. So I don't follow anybody else. I don't try and be like anybody else. I just want to be the best me that I can be. So I don't know what it is for you, but how can you be the best you, the best version of you, the best expression of you? And I think that that's very important, is how do you express yourself? I'm a speaker and a writer and author, but that's not who I am. That's how I express myself through those avenues. But who are you? What makes you tick? Have you worked that out yet? I would suggest that you go onto marcusbuckingham.com and go and do his free standout assessment. Carmen, maybe you can just pop marcusbuckingham.com into the chat window. It is so worth doing, and it's so confirmed what I always knew about myself. So I don't get up every day to speak and write. What gets me up is that I am an analyzer and a synthesizer. I like pulling things apart and putting them back together in a different way once I understand them, and packaging complex things in an accessible way for other people. That's what gets me up in the morning, because I like to find meaning. So what are you doing to find meaning in your life? And I bumped into a young woman at a wedding. It was my husband's niece's wedding. That was about 5 years ago. And I love to find out why people do what they do. So I'm chatting to this girl called Lisa. And I say to her, so Lisa, what do you do? And she says, I'm with Standard Bank. And I say, so what do you do? She says, I build financial products. I said, so what did you study? She said, architecture. I said, huh? How does that work? She said, well, I wanted to be a fashion designer, but my parents said that wasn't a valid career. So they said I had to do architecture. And this conversation went on, and eventually we worked out that as long as Lisa is building things and designing things, she's happy. Whether it's dresses or buildings or financial products, it's all similar stuff. Okay. And then I met her about 3 or 4 years later, and I remembered her name, and we got into conversation. And she said, I said to her, how is Standard Bank? Are you still there? And she said, actually, no. I've got the best job in the world. She said, I am helping to build Patrice Motsepe's bank, his new bank. And she said, and I'm designing clothes on the side. So she's holding on to the essence of who she is. As long as she's designing and building, it doesn't matter what she's designing and building. She's expressing who she is. When I did that standout assessment, it threw up that I am a teacher and I'm a creator. And it is absolutely perfect. It talks about how I pull things apart and put them back together again. It's almost word perfect. It's who I am. So go and do that if you want to get a little bit of a window into who you are. And I've just done that for a team that I run. I did that assessment with every single one of them. I had intuitively positioned each person in a portfolio that I felt was right and they felt was right. And when we did that standout strengths assessment, it was spot on why those people are in those positions. And this team is pumping, absolutely pumping. And then the last thing I want to say about the lessons from the widow. And the reason this puzzle is up here is because it's one of those puzzles. I used to have a smiley face puzzle when I was a kid like this. One piece, there's one gap. You have to move the pieces around until you get all the right pieces in order. For me, it was to create a smiley face. Here, it would be to get all your numbers in the right order. Why I put this up is that this is my life's philosophy. I've always believed, and this is from my 20s, that if one person shifts their piece and creates a new gap, it gives everybody else permission to move their piece. So whether it's within your family, within your marriage, within your management team, if one person moves a piece, everyone else has permission, but they don't have to. They may choose to move their piece. We are so used to making people move their pieces, it's not funny. And right now, me moving out of the house, me moving into another place without my children is a massive gap opener to enable them to stand on their own 2 feet and be independent. My husband dying was a piece of the puzzle shifting, enabling me, my kids, and everyone who knew him to shift a piece. If there's an affair in a marriage, however you choose to deal with it, whether you stay, whether you go, somebody makes a decision to shift a piece. Everybody else gets impacted by that decision. We as women hold a lot of power because we are usually the ones who are brave enough to move a piece of the puzzle. I wonder what pieces or what piece of the puzzle you might be contemplating moving right now, because you will make space for new adventures, new people, new opportunities, and new possibilities if you're brave enough to move a piece. And being brave enough to move a piece might be moving jobs. It might be giving up a job. It might be starting a new business. It might be, if you don't have a relationship, starting up a relationship with someone. It might be ending a relationship with someone. There are just so many possibilities, but I think we are often so limited by that cage that we have built around ourselves, where the comfort zone is that we have no idea of what the forest looks like beyond that cage. And we get into that trap and we fear change. We fear letting go of our past conditioning, that women are always victims, women are always hard done by, But what happened to that powerful, strong woman that's sitting there? I promise you, that powerful, strong woman is just sitting there waiting to be released. She's just holding on to those patterns. The other picture that's on this screen is an important one. And that is, and for those of you who haven't heard my what if happens talk, or my reframing COVID-19 talk that has been very popular over this time, is I want to share the comma and ... analogy with you. And that is something very profound that was shared with me the night of my husband's funeral. So we had the funeral in the afternoon on a Saturday, a week after his death. And that evening, we had a wake for nearest and dearest friends. And as you can imagine, I was in such unbelievable shock that I had barely cried in that first week. But we got to a place that evening where people started leaving. And I started to cry. And I started to cry because I realized that I didn't know what tomorrow looked like. And tomorrow was Sunday. How many thousands of Sundays had I lived in my life? But tomorrow, Sunday, I had no clue what Sunday looked like. And it felt like a full stop. And my friend, who was a psychologist, get the synchronicity in that, turned around to me and said, "Nix, what's happening for you?" And I just said, "This moment just feels like a full stop. It feels like the end of everything I know." And she said, "Well, can I encourage you to try and reframe that full stop as a comma, as a pause in your life?" And then she added a comma and ... And the dots are the future that you are going to create for yourself. And it was just the most empowering thing that somebody could have said to me in that moment. I didn't realize it at the time how useful this analogy was going to become for me. I don't think she for a minute knew how powerful this analogy would be. But I'm a visual person, and she gave me something I could latch onto. And by tasking me, by giving me the responsibility for creating my future, the dots, she threw the ball back at me. And in a way, that has ensured that I have not become a victim of what happened. It would have been very easy to have become a victim of what happened to us. And so I have, as I have said to you, very consciously chosen new people, new experiences, new places. Those are what make up my dots that are creating the fabric of this new life. And yes, I do still see my family, and I still see my best friends. But my life has become a lot broader than that, and very, very interesting and full of new possibilities and opportunities. So I'm giving you this analogy this evening to help you firstly cope with COVID, because you need to see if you can turn COVID into a comma, into a reset point, a time to reinvent, to revisit how we feel, how we think, what's working for us, what's not working for us, what are we holding on to that maybe we can give away, what can we let go of, and what do we need to embrace? So see if you can use that for COVID and maybe any other situation in your life that you are holding on to as a full stop. Maybe it's something recent, or maybe it's something very old that you are still holding on to as a full stop that is still keeping you as a victim rather than enabling you to be broken open and planted like a seed. So I have just found that the most powerful, powerful analogy. And I think this is true, that the same boiling water that softens the potato hardens the egg. It's about what you're made of, not the circumstances. It's so easy to blame circumstances on how we're feeling, how we're thinking, what's going on for us in our lives. And in that way, we just never give ourselves the opportunity to grow and to move on from what is happening. So I really want to task you with living fearlessly. And I want to read you something that I wrote this past weekend. So I said, living fearlessly is to live with an open heart, to notice the tightening in your heart when you feel the need to defend yourself. And I think as women, we often feel the need to defend ourselves, whether it's that we're feeling guilty, not good enough, imposter syndrome. It's your cue that it's your time to grow and let go. Defending yourself creates a lot of work. It's a lifetime It's a lifetime task to keep defending your psyche, your soft spots. The pain of exposure is the price you are willing to pay for freedom. The reward for not protecting your psyche is liberation. Have fun experiencing what happens next. Be surprised. Get rid of the scared person inside. Be an explorer instead of a defender. That's actually something that I've been saying to people during COVID, is when we're out fighting a war, we're not exploring. We're not able to invent a new life. Christopher Columbus was an explorer. He set off across the ocean to the Americas, not quite sure how far it was going to be or what he was going to find on the other side, but he stepped off the map of all he knew. And look what happened next. Be broken open instead of buried as a victim, naming, blaming, and shaming circumstances in life. If you have no need to defend your physical self, don't fall into the trap of your psychology, your mind, and your self-concepts. Our major struggles end up being with our own inner fear, insecurities, and destructive behavior patterns, and not with outside forces. We've developed, and listen to this, a hypersensitive psyche, constantly using our energies to close around it and protect ourselves. But this process only hides the problems. It doesn't fix them. You're locking your illness inside. My own writing is bad. Your own illness inside itself, and it will only get worse. If you overprotect yourself, you will never be free. If you protect yourself perfectly, you will never grow. Life becomes stagnant when people protect their stored issues. Isn't that quite interesting? So we need to be a lot more open-hearted. So before I go on, and I know that we are nearly done, I would like to ask you a question. Who is responsible for your happiness and success? Who's responsible for your own happiness and success? The happiness and success that you experience, who gets that? Who gives it to you? Great. Thank you for that. It is 100% you. 100%. Oh, we got 3%. 3% saying other people. And I think often we do give other people responsibility for our own happiness and our own success. Even mums, those of you who are mums, I just want to say this to you. We often give our children the responsibility for making us happy. And it is a completely misdirected responsibility, and it's inappropriate. If there's one thing you take away from this evening, perhaps it's this picture, that your children need to see you claiming your own version of happiness, your own version of peace of mind. If they don't see you claiming that and building it for yourself, they will always be looking outside of themselves for happiness and success. And they will also fall into the trap of naming, blaming, and shaming other people for the fact that they are not happy, satisfied, and successful. So I think children give us the acid test. Yes, the world must accommodate us, but we must also adapt. And if things are not feeling right, we need to step back and see what it is we have to let go of and what it is we perhaps need to claim. So, there is something I want to share with you before I ask this question. And that is success. I want to just deal with this question, and I need to go and fetch something from my desk very quickly. But I want to make a comment here about women and success because it is coming up in all of my women's workshops at the moment, that we are so busy either feeling imposter syndrome or we are so busy moving from one success or one thing to another that we never let our success or feeling of satisfaction truly land for us. We literally move from one to the other. I think men go out and knock a beer back with a friend and go, yeah, that was good. I did that well, or whatever it is that they do. And I think that we are on such a treadmill that it doesn't land. So I have taken to, when I moved house, I found this bell in one of my cabinets, and I now keep it on my desk. And every time I experience some success, whether it's that I get a new speaking booking for a company, or whether this workshop was filled this evening, or whether one of my kids phones and tells me that something's going right, or that I just feel satisfied, I ring my bell. And the most amazing thing about ringing a bell is that I hear it, I see it, and I feel the vibration going through my entire being, from my brain to the ends of my fingers and my toes. And it's a very visceral experience of appreciating what I have experienced or achieved. So I wonder what it is that you are doing to help yourself to experience success, to help that feeling to land, to not let go of it too quickly. I am going to open up the session for people to give feedback, but before I do, I would like to ask this audience, how are you feeling now? How are you feeling now? Enlightened, empowered, ready to show up? What is the strongest feeling that you have right now? And Carmen, if you can just please make sure I have these results for later, that would be great. Okay, and by the way, these polls are completely anonymous. I don't know who's saying what. So you can pick whatever you like. So it looks like 40% of you are feeling enlightened, 42% are feeling empowered, and 19% of you are ready to show up. So of course, what we're talking about this evening, a different way of being in the world, takes some practice. It takes courage. It takes bravery to step out in the world and to be different to how we have been before. And we really need to engage with this stuff with an open heart, with a peaceful, fully inspired heart. And you see, if I take you back to that cage we were talking about earlier, when our edges happen to hit the edge of the cage, we must get to a point where the mind doesn't complain, where it kind of passes through us, it bounces off us. I've had to make some really tough decisions in the last 2.5 years. And I've had to make the best possible decision for me, or for me and my children. And there are a lot of people who wouldn't have made some of the decisions I've made, but I've really had to search my heart and search my soul and really ask, what is the right thing for me? In a way, I have acquired, through bizarre circumstances, through very traumatic circumstances, some extraordinary kind of freedom. And a friend of mine who's been widowed for 12 years sat me down 6 months after my husband's death, and he was a very good mate of my husband. And he said to me, Nikki, you have acquired a very rare form of freedom. He said, your husband was killed. It's a public thing. Everybody knows what happened. There's no mystery. You're not divorced. There's no stigma. Your children are the age they are, as in matric and just a few years older than that. So he said, your children don't need you. He was widowed with 9-month-old twins and a 5-year-old son. Very, very different circumstances. You know, we have to take our own situation into account with every decision we take. Grief is situational. Loss is situational. Success is situational. It's all based on our own unique circumstances and situations. And he reminded me of this. And he said to me, Nikki, before you settle down with someone, you need to date, you need to travel, you need to experience stuff. Because when are you going to get this kind of freedom again? He said, the minute you commit to somebody, you will start shutting down your freedom. But within our relationships, within our jobs, within our situation and circumstances, we have to find our peace. We have to find our freedom. And we have to relax into the edges, and we have to become okay with a bit of discomfort, because as one of my mentors said very early on in my career, if you're feeling uncomfortable, you are probably growing. And never was a truer word said. So we need to end up loving bumping into the edges, because that's challenging us, challenging our perception of who we are and our reality. And then we have to relax into those edges and lean into them. And then one day we might fall right through into the beyond the cage. And then, yep, things can be very, very different. So before I open up to the floor to find out what your takeaways are from this evening, I just want to mention one more thing. Next Wednesday, we are running another Wednesday webinar, Webinar Wednesday, as we call them, and it's Being a Man in a Women's World webinar, and this is for men only. And if you have a man in your life, I think if you want better relationships, it would be a fantastic thing to get him registered on this webinar, which is being run by Buster Seafor, who is a veteran in men's work and in transformation work. And he's going to share with men some really deep, deep stuff that they may have never, ever considered before. So I wonder what it is for you this evening that's been challenging. What are you considering that maybe you haven't considered before? And what has been, or what is your biggest aha or take home from this evening?